Welcome back to week 2 of our series on the 7 monastic steps. It's great for you to join us for this win-win exhortation to the discipline of silence. It's my hope that by the end of this video you'll be carried on my words like a cloud blown on the wind of tranquility to a blissful heavenly silence. Failing that, you'll be so desperate for me to shut up that you'll be rendered taciturn and plunge yourself into the nearest dark corner. Like I said, win-win. So here we are, with the Rule of Sin Benedict open before us, and his first word is listen. Listen, my child, and turn the ear of thine heart to the precepts of thy master. The rule begins with these words, and its entirety hereafter is directed to this end, that we may hear the voice of our master. I want us to recognize 3 masters in this sentence. Firstly, we are to some extent the masters of our own fate, enjoying various degrees of autonomy over our lives. Secondly, we're under the authority of others, formally, socially, and politically. And thirdly, we are, I believe, as uncomfortable as this sounds, accountable to God. Discomfort brings us neatly to this first step: silence, that awkward, socially devastating intruder to the natural music of our everyday lives. But I want to suggest that silence is our friend, not our foe, for these 3 simple reasons. Silence helps us listen to ourselves, to others, and to God. Whether it's an awkward silence when you run out of things to say in the queue in Buttery, or that blissful moment at the end of Compline or a concert in an old hall, silence is rarely neutral. It can be an uncomfortable thing, and it can be a good thing. We might ballot for rooms that are quiet, or take a walk somewhere that we can be alone, but the biggest challenge, and the one which, when overcome, pays the greater dividend, is finding positive silence within ourselves. Many of us do whatever we can to avoid silence with background music, podcasts, the radio, and increasingly with visual noise. I know that one of my worst habits is flicking through endless gardens and cities and menageries on Instagram because I want to keep the surface of my mind occupied so that I can avoid listening to myself, probably because I'm afraid of what I might hear. I'm scared of being confronted with my own thoughts and problems and fears, but I need to hear them because it's important to be able to examine oneself. It's important to know who you are, to learn to love yourself, and to have the strength to overcome the doubts and misgivings which harangue and harass you. When we learn to be comfortable in our own skin, then we can be better friends and siblings and children, better and otherwise more authentic and whole human beings, and that breeds contentment. Which brings us to silence for others' sake. If you can truly listen to your loved ones, you will serve them immeasurably. You can do an extraordinary amount of good by just letting someone else talk. Really listening to them, rather than waiting for them to stop speaking, means that you can respond to their needs properly. Benedictine silence is a lifestyle which is simply impractical for most of us. As much as I might delight in ignoring the Dean of Chapel, I have to reply and nod and be polite because it's my job. But there are still plenty of things which we can glean from this discipline for our everyday lives. Benedict's chapter on silence quotes the psalmist: "I have resolved to keep watch over my ways, so that I may not sing with my tongue." Benedict encourages us not to speak so as to avoid sin. And this is something we can all do. Sometimes being silent isn't about serenity, it's about not being unkind or hurtful or rude. Perhaps next time you want to say something harmful, opt instead for silence. Benedictine silence is predicated on the belief that silence is even better and wiser than saying good things, which can be quite useful for us to remember. As the old saying goes, it's better to sit in silence and everyone to think you're a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Silence, however, is more than a shield to help us preserve face. It can be a surrender and an attitude of attention. It is in silence that we hear the voice of our Creator. In the book of Kings, the prophet Elijah was called onto the mountainside to hide in the face of the rock and to meet with God. He heard the voice of God not in the wind or the earthquake or fire, but in the still, small voice which followed. In silence, we listen to that still, small voice of God. We may want to hear God speaking to us in a booming baritone out of the sky, but God shouts to his enemies and whispers to his friends. Benedict's chapter ends with this injunction. The task of the disciple is to be silent and listen. Implicit in our silence is the willingness to learn from ourselves, from others, and from God. So, here are a few suggestions to help you find your way through to a place of positive inner silence. Firstly, try to create privileged times and places of silence in your routine. It's great to start, if you can, with a physical space and physical silence. Whether it's the corner of a room or a seat in the garden, try going to a particular spot to be silent in. Physical place helps us to find the spiritual space. If you can do this in the presence of natural or artistic beauty, so much the better. Try taking time twice a day, in the early morning and in the evening. That way you can build silence into your routine. Start with about 5 minutes at first, and then consider growing that slowly to periods of up to half an hour. Set a timer, put away your phone and on silent so you don't get distracted by looking at the time or notifications. Light a candle or look at the top of a tree and concentrate on your breathing. As we know, silence isn't easy or comfortable all the time, so it's important to persevere. The statutes of the Carthusian order say this: the fruit that silence brings is known to him who has experienced it. In the early stages, we may find silence a burden. However, if we are faithful, there will gradually be born of us, of our silence, something that will draw us on to a still greater silence. To some extent, any words about silence are wasted, and the thing to do is to just get on with it. Hopefully this will be a useful tool in your lockdown kit, but this isn't just about survival, it's about growth. To know yourself, to grow, require insights that only solitude and introspection can bring. Next week we'll be tackling the distractions that come to us in silence and learning to shift our focus as we explore the next monastic step, contemplation. I hope you join us then.